Welcome back to Architecture Topics. Today, we arrive at the final chapter of our journey through the story of the New York World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, and their legacy. If you've been following along, you've heard about their rise in the 1970s, their tragic fall in 2001, and the long, messy debates about what should come next. But don't worry if this is the first episode you're tuning into. This story also stands on its own. Today we are going to be talking about the One World Trade Center, initially called Freedom Tower. It is the tallest tower within the rebuild master plan, and as such, it naturally inherited the role of becoming an icon for New York, for the United States, and for the modern world. It's the tallest building in the United States, and one of the most scrutinized skyscrapers ever built. So let's jump right into it. After the competition to rebuild Ground Zero ended with Daniel Libeskind as the winner, there was a sense of direction, at least on paper. His master plan placed memory at the center. The footprints of the Twin Towers were to remain untouched, transformed into memorial fountains. Around them, new towers would rise in a spiral, stepping down in height as they moved away from the northwest corner. At the tip of that spiral, on the site of the old Six World Trade Center, would stand the tallest of them all. A building that Libeskind envisioned not just as a skyscraper, but as a beacon. He called it the Freedom Tower. But Larry Silverstein, who held the lease on the World Trade Center, didn't want an avant-garde icon. He wanted a commercially viable office tower. And soon, he brought in architect David Childs from the powerful firm Skidmore, Owings and Merrill to take the reins. Libeskind was asked to collaborate with Childs, but in the end, it was Childs who left the deepest mark on the tower design as we see it today. As soon as Childs began reworking the project, one factor became predominant over almost any other: security. The memory of 9/11 was still raw, and every sketch was haunted by the possibility of another attack. Even the New York Police Department participated in this process and pushed for extraordinary safety measures until eventually the base of the tower was transformed into a massive concrete pedestal designed to resist explosions and vehicle bombs. To soften its appearance, the pedestal was clad in thousands of prismatic glass panels and stainless steel fins. These panels catch and scatter the light, disguising security with architecture and making the fortress look like an aesthetic choice. Above that fortress-like base, the tower took on a crystalline form. It rises from a square base to another square at the top, but rotated 45 degrees from the one at the base. Childs designed a series of 8 isosceles triangles to connect these two rotated squares. The result is a building that changes the geometry of its floor plan at every floor. If you scan the building from the ground up, the building starts as a square. At the midpoint, it becomes an octagon. And at the top, it becomes a perfect square again, but rotated. This simple 45-degree rotation turns a volume which would otherwise have been a simple prism into something more complex, more powerful. As the sunlight moves across the glass, the tower seems to shift in shape, reflecting the sky like a crystal prism. And how high is this prism? It's 1,776 feet, or 541 meters. Libeskind had proposed this height as a gesture towards history and patriotism, as 1776 was the year of American independence. Childs kept it, but only by including the spire. Without it, the roof is much lower at 1,368 feet or 416 meters, which is also symbolic, matching the height of the original North Tower. This compromise between symbolism and practicality would be a theme that followed the tower through every stage of its creation. But design was only half the battle. Building One World Trade Center proved to be an even greater challenge. Even after David Childs took the reins, the project still suffered numerous delays arguments, and ballooning costs. Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder, wanted control. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which owned the land, wanted control too. And meanwhile, politicians, who had a lot to say in granting permits, wanted to make sure the project spoke to the public mood. Every new party that got involved added another layer of demands. At the heart of the debates was a simple but unsettling question. Who was this building really for? For the tenants who would be asked to work in one of the most visible terrorist targets in the world. For the public, who demanded a symbol of resilience? Or for investors who needed the tower to be commercially viable? For years, those questions slowed everything down. In 2004, New York Governor George Pataki held a high-profile ceremony, laying the cornerstone of the new Freedom Tower. It was meant to be a turning point, a way to show that construction was truly underway. But the gesture quickly rang hollow, as disputes over design, financing, and security kept dragging the project. The stone itself was even removed later, when the foundation was redesigned, a perfect symbol of how fragile progress really was. Then, in 2008, as the financial crisis hit, everything became even more uncertain. If major banks and corporations were struggling, who would sign leases in the most expensive office tower ever built? The Port Authority eventually struck a deal with Silverstein. One World Trade Center would move forward as the flagship project, while the other planned towers would follow more slowly, depending on the market. Construction began, but it was painfully slow. The enormous concrete base, designed as a fortress, took years to rise. By the time steel began climbing above it, the public had almost grown cynical, as if the building might never appear. But, piece by piece, it did. By 2010, the steel skeleton was visible across the city. By 2012, the structure had reached its maximum height. And for the first time in more than a decade, Lower Manhattan had surpassed Midtown in height. Then, in May of 2013, the spire was lifted into place, officially bringing the height to 1,776 feet. For some, it was a triumphant moment. For others, it reopened debates about what really counted as height, which, let me tell you, is way more complicated to answer than you can imagine. Maybe we'll dedicate an episode to that topic one day. Anyway, the argument went on for months, but in the end, One World Trade Center was recognized as the tallest building in the United States. And finally, in November of 2014, more than 13 years after the attacks, One World Trade Center opened its doors. The first tenant to move in was Condé Nast, the publishing giant behind Vogue and The New Yorker. It was a symbolic gesture. A creative powerhouse choosing to set up its offices in the very place that had once been devastated. During this whole process, the cost of the project had soared from an original $3 billion to nearly $4 billion, making it the most expensive office building in history at the time. But at last, the skyline was whole again. For many New Yorkers, seeing a tower once again dominating the skyline of Lower Manhattan was deeply emotional. After more than a decade of absence, the city felt somehow restored. But critics were not as unanimous. Some praised David Childs for delivering a dignified, restrained tower that avoided spectacle, while others saw it as overly cautious, weighted down by politics and security concerns. A building designed more by committee than by vision. The massive concrete base in particular became a point of criticism. Let's not forget the tower was initially named the Freedom Tower, a name that had stirred a patriotic fervor. So to many, the final design made the tower look defensive, more like a fortress than a welcoming civic landmark. But officials had quietly retired the Freedom Tower naming in 2009, rebranding the building as One World Trade Center. The new name was meant to attract tenants who preferred stability over symbolism, but to some it felt like a retreat from the very ideals the tower was supposed to embody. Yet despite all the debates, the building has slowly settled into its role. It is now home to thousands of workers, to the One World Observatory, and to a new kind of downtown economy no longer centered only on finance. Seen from the water or from the streets of Brooklyn, it anchors the skyline with clarity. It does not try to replace the Twin Towers, but it does remind us that something has risen in their place. In that sense, perhaps, it fulfills its purpose, which is not to erase the memory of loss, but to show that the city endured. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Architecture Topics and this mini-series about the New York World Trade Center. If you have a moment, please let me know in the comments if you would like to see more of these mini-series on other topics, or if you prefer that I keep episodes completely unrelated from one another. On the one hand, this format allows me to go into more detail on a given topic, but it also means that we are stuck, for lack of a better word, with that topic for a few weeks. What do you think? I'm Liam Karen, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, keep looking up.